All right, 10 o'clock local time. Good morning, good day, depending on where you are. My name is Ramin Ismaili from Softing Industrial. I have Andreas Röck with me. Andy, good morning to you. Andy, he's the head of product management for Softing Industrial in Nuremberg and will present within somewhere around half an hour on the topic of storing machine data with InfluxDB and other databases. The recording will be made available. So yes, this will be recorded. I would like you to be aware of that. It will be made available together with the questions and answers towards the end, as well as the actual presentation itself. Be more than welcome to raise your questions in the chat, and Andy will attend to the questions towards the end. That's enough from my side. I'll hand over to you, Andreas, and enjoy an interesting webinar. Thank you.
Hello and welcome from my side as well. Also today's webinar, storage of machine data with InfluxDB and other databases. The agenda of this webinar is first some, I will say, theoretical part with why collecting data, typical scenarios, database types and the differences, InfluxDB, what is it, data storage with the softing solution, with the dataFEED OPC Suite, and then also as a minimum half of the time, I will do a live demo about how to store the data from a Siemens S7-1500 PLC into an InfluxDB, and at the end, something like a small conclusion. We start with the topic, why collect data? Everyone from you knows more or less the headline Industry 4.0. To more or less be able to use Industry 4.0, the benefits and so on of this topic, it is needed to more or less collect all the data from the different parts of the production to have a better possibility later on to take a look to your productivity or efficiency and also flexibility. And also if you want to connect all your process parts in your production together, called smart production, requires also the availability of data from the different parts. More or less the summary of all of this, we called it process data logging. That's more or less one important part for the Industry 4.0 topic. The typical scenario is more or less to read the data from different sources, for example, application or some sensors, robots or controllers, more or less reading this process data and store this data in a database. In our case, for today, in an InfluxDB. How you can do this, I will show it you later in the live demo. At the beginning, some additional information. There are existing different types of databases. So most persons are talking about SQL databases, structured query language databases, or no SQL databases, which are called not only structured query language. But from my personal point of view, a comparison based on these terms makes for me no sense, because these two terms describes only the type of access to the data. And for me, it's more relevant to compare it on the kind of database, relational and non-relational databases. This is, for me, the bigger point. Why? Because if you see the differences between the databases, it's not focused on how to get access to the data, it's focused how they are structured more or less. The relational databases, like the already, I think, well-known databases from Oracle, MySQL or Microsoft SQL, they are storing the data in structured form in data and tables in columns. This is the typical way since, I will say, decades. The data is easier to query. There exists a standard query language, SQL. But one big drawback of all this, expanding data is problematic. To add an additional column or to add some additional tables always generates effort, and it's not so easy later on also if you take a look to the data. These are, from my personal view, some big topics to this relational databases. For the non-relational databases, this I personally call this more modern databases, like a MongoDB or a CouchDB or an InfluxDB. They are storing the data or saving the data in a different kind of form, like a document. Everyone knows a Word document, and for example, the MongoDB, it's a document-based database storing the data like a document. And all of you know, a document can be extended without any problems. Or to store in diagrams, or especially this InfluxDB stores this in time series format. This is one benefit of this, I will say, modern non-relational databases and expansion. Later on, it's possible at any time. And last but not least, what is also for me a big advantage, you can easily manage a large amount of data, because on the initial concept of all these new databases, the huge number of data was a prerequisite. They are existing for both a lot of more differentiations, but I don't want to focus on the differentiations, only on the databases. I will show you a little bit more an overview. Coming now to the InfluxDB. What is this? It's a non-relational database. Sometimes it's also called as a database management system. Why? From Influx, from the company itself, comes a little bit more than only the database. This database is specialized in storing time series. It's also called time series database. The focus is really storing time series. This brings us together back to the data which we have in a production environment. Process data typically are time series. You store the temperature of your complete day from your production for later control if everything was okay. It's a time series. So this is why a time series database is, from my personal point of view, an ideal database for collecting process data. The InfluxDB has a high scalability and a high availability. So it's also great to enlarge it if your factory would be bigger or if you want to store more data. And it's very efficient when processing large amount of data. And last but not least, is an open source database. From this point of view, it's also good to start to try to test it. Coming to the softing solution for it, from our point of view, we prefer to have here a dataFEED suite, which is, from our point of view, an all-in-one data integration solution, which helps you really storing your data in any kind of, I will say, databases. But the dataFEED suite has a little bit more than only storing the data. I will show you a little bit later on in the live demo, but now we have a lot of data sources in the suite from which we can collect our data. For example, from a controller, from a PLC. In the future, beginning of February, we will have also the possibility to acquire the data from a CNC controller. In the first step, we will support the numeric 840T. Then we can collect the data from OPC classic servers or from UA servers. Or if we have an underlying OPC UA or OPC tunnel server, we can also collect the data. Or directly from an MQTT publisher or from an MQTT broker, or we can read the data out of an SQL database or also out of a data file. These are our data sources on which we acquire all the data. On the other side has the suite a lot of data destinations. On the one hand, also we have the big part of OPC, classic and UA. In addition, also tunnel. If you do not want to have some DCOM communication, you can use our tunnel solution. In addition, we have also modern interfaces. I called it sometimes in this case MQTT or REST interface. In the future, we will have also directly the possibility to connect from web services. And what is our main topic today? The database API, also OPC driver, which allows you to connect to NoSQL databases or SQL databases. And in the middle, we have some, I will say, processing topics, like our pre-processing engine, which allows you to manipulate your received data from the sources before maybe storing in a database. For example, converting from the temperature from Celsius degree into Fahrenheit or vice versa, or some mathematical operations on the data and so on. We have an exchange, which allows the exchange of data between data sources, store and forward for the most destinations for both database types, and local items if you need some local data points. This is our dataFEED suite, which I will show you now. What is our scope of functionality for this today's webinar is data logging. We have some data sources, so we receive the data and we store the data in different kind of databases. It can be a local hosted SQL or NoSQL database, or it can be also a cloud hosted database. It makes it quite simple, quite easy. You can choose your database, whatever you want. In addition, we are also able to store the data in a file. What are our benefits? On the one hand, we can store everything, was already explained. Fast and easy setup of the database connection. You see it later in the live demo. It's really quite simple, quite easy, without any programming knowledge. You have not to do any programming. We have for the SQL database a receipt manager functionality, which allows you to read the data out of the database and store the information in a controller, for example. And last but not least, for all of our database connection, we have a store and forward functionality, which buffers the data in case of a broken connection and automatic forward once the connection with the database has been re-established. So quite simple, quite fast. This was a theoretical part. Coming now a little bit from my personal point of view to the more interesting part, to the live demo. First of all, I have created on the Azure cloud, and we have at Softing in Azure cloud and InfluxDB hosted. On this Azure cloud InfluxDB hosted InfluxDB, I have added two different databases. One is called RK8, my shortcut, and the second one RK implicit, in which I want to store now the data. From this, I will switch now to our dataFEED OPC Suite. So we have here our dataFEED OPC Suite. Similar like in the presentation, we have the different data sources. For our demo, I prefer now to add here connection to a Siemens S7-1500. I can specify an own name. I select the application protocol which I want to use for the connectivity. On the next page, I must enter the IP address of my controller. And then I have the possibility to test it. Connection test successful. On the next page, I can enable the filter, or if I want to do the arrays resolved in addition, can be configured. And on the next page, now our suite directly connects to this PLC and receives all the structure information and all the data points from the PLC directly. So it's on the fly. We have browsed the PLC and get all the information. This was a fast, small, easy part of connecting a PLC to our suite. Coming now to the next topic is to add here a data destination. We have here different kind of data destinations. It's already explained, UA, OPC Classic, MQTT, this web server topic, and also the two types of databases, SQL databases, classical ones like the Oracle or MySQL, or in our case, what I will use for the demo, it's a NoSQL database. The configuration of both types is similar. On the SQL database, you have only selected tables, and here you have selected a little bit different, I will say, destinations, but it's similar. I enable it, automatically it's open the wizard. On the first page, I can specify the name, if the connector is active, and I must select the different as a database type which I want to support or which I want to use. In our case, InfluxDB. Next. On the next page, I must specify the address. In our case, just 1 second. Where it is? Oops. Just 1 second. I need my, no, sorry. So I enter here the address. It's my InfluxDB, which is hosted in Azure. And in addition, I must specify also a token, something like similar to a password to connect to this, I will say, database. And after you have entered this API token, we build a connectivity to the database to receive the organization name. On our database, we have only one organization. But if you have multiple, you can select now your organization. I select my organization and I will test my connection. Connection test successful. Quite easy, quite simple. I can now finish, or if I want, I can also specify the extended settings, date, time format if I want to change it, or if I want to have some different request timeouts, or also here I can configure the store and forward. For our demo, I will do it without store and forward. Finish. This was a fast and easy part for connecting to the database. Now it comes a part on which I want to, about the data which I want to store. I add a new action, we call it action. In this action, when you open it, you can specify a name and you can select now, I call it table, similar like an SQL topic from the database. I have here create two, RKA and RKA implicit. I select the first one. You can specify the precision of your, I will say timestamps. And here you can see something which we receive also from the database. The schema explicit means it is a predefined schema which is specified at the database itself. So this is similar, I will say, to an SQL database. It's more or less fixed. The next page here, we must select the timer. I prefer a timer trigger. I will add here a timer trigger with 1 second. Yep. So we have now our timer. Every second we will store the data in the database. Due to the fact that we have here a bucket schema with explicit, when we add here a new measurement, we will receive automatically the list of measurements which are specified in the database. I have only one measurement specified. It's called test. I receive it. I can select it. Next, I can select my timestamp. I want to use the timestamp from the Suite host, not from the InfluxDB. Then I specify my text, or I define my text, which are specified in the database. The tag is room 1, and I specify here the room 1, it's from Andreas, my room. And in addition, I specify now the fields which should be transferred. The key is already set in the database. I receive it from the database. I have only one, but I receive it. And I can select here now the item, the tag which I want to store. In our case, I want to store from the DB5, from the current value. That's all what I have to specify. Press OK. And now the temperature of my room will be stored in the database. I can see here now my action and say finish. That's all. And when I save and restart it, now my room temperature will be stored in the database. To take a look now in the database, I will put here. I have generated two dashboards, one for the first demo now. If you take a look, you can see here we receive the values, the temperature value of my room. And if I put my hand on the temperature, on the sensor, we must see it goes up. Just 10 seconds, wait 10 seconds until we receive it. Now it goes up, the temperature goes up. So it was a quite simple, quite easy way to store the data. But this is explicit mode of the database. You are more or less similar like with the SQL database, like tables and so on, and the structure and everything is fixed. But to show you now a little bit more the flexible way, I will add now a second action, which use now an implicit database or table, or however you will call it. I select it, I change also microseconds, and here I will use the same trigger every 1 second. And when you want to specify now your data, you will not receive any information. You must specify it by yourself. For example, measurement, I will call it webinar 2, for example. Then I specify a tag, which allows an easier selection or filtering of the data points. Room, I called it room Andreas. Oh, my fault. Room Andreas. My second room, for example, and the tag temperature. And here I can select, for example, my temperature value. All. And now with this values, it will be transferred to the database. I will now finish it, restart it. Then we can take a look to the database itself. But here I must select my second dashboard. Just 1 second. Nothing is. Must wait until it's restarted. Stopped, and now it's running. So when we select here, I must select here my data points. Maybe just so we have, how we called it, was it demo room 2 exactly, Andreas, and here I can select my data point. I submit it, no results. Just 1 second. Maybe I did a mistake. Andreas 2, the room, temperature. Field, my temperature. Now I have got. My fault. Sorry. I did a small mistake. I must start from scratch. Room Andreas 2. Webinar 2. Why I cannot see it? Something is wrong. Normally I should see here my possible selection. All method. Room Andreas 2. Temperature. Now I got it. And here you can see the room temperature. And if I put my hands on it, I can go back. I will refresh it. It goes now. Okay. Only I send now the temperature. But if I want to extend it, what is one of the benefits of this database, I can easily add additional values. For example, I have here only currently the room temperature, and I want to add here in addition, for example, my sawtooth information. I select the next variable, and this is one of the biggest benefit of this databases. Quite easy, quite simple to extend it. Or additional, if I want to go more, this is, for example, a timer. I can send in 1 second timer, I can add here. All this can be added in the suite. I will say next finish, save and restart. And then this new information will be also stored now in the database without any change on the database itself. Only on my dashboard, when it is started now. Starts now. I must select the new variables. There's 2, and I want to field. I can see only the temperature. Doesn't. Maybe I must change it first. Switch. Field room What is the room? Andreas, sawtools, float, temperature, why it? No, doesn't like me currently. I want to see the timer. If here's a timer, the sawtools. Now we see it exactly. This is the timer, but the sawtools will be not shown correctly. I don't know why the sawtools is not correctly shown. You can let's select here the different fields. I have currently no idea why the sawtooth is not shown correctly the value. My fault. Maybe I must disable the timer. And then we see it. Yeah, it was my fault. Yeah, it correctly stores the values, but if we enable the timer, you can see the timer is currently at a value of something like 20,000. So the other one, it's a little bit small. So if we disable the timer, we can see the sawtooth and also the temperature. Was my fault. So maybe timer it's not the best. Okay. We have all the data stored in the database. With implicit, it makes it quite simple, quite easy to extend it. This is one of the benefits of this, I will say, InfluxDB. Okay. That's all from the live demo. What we have done in these 3 steps, so it's quite easy. First, preparing the database. You must select the database, what you want to use. In our case, an InfluxDB. I have it done previously, the installation and the configuration of the database. You have to select your data source and configuring of the data source connection. It was in our case the S7-1500 connection. You have to configure the database connectivity to the influx, and you must do the definition of the variables to be saved in the InfluxDB. From this point of view, quite simple, quite fast, quite easy. Coming to a final conclusion, the dataFEED suite with its various options, it's an ideal product for storing process data in databases. If you want to try it, you can download it from our website. The demo modus around 72 hours. After 72 hours, only restart is necessary, so you can really test everything. And if you have any further questions, please feel free to contact us at info.automation@softing. So I will hand over now back to Ramin before we go in the direction of answering the questions.
Okay, thank you, Andreas. And now I would give over to Andreas for the questions we might have.
First questions we already received from Mr. Van Eybergen. Is it possible to create your setup in an external file and import that? Yes, but it's not one file. The suite configuration is organized in multiple files. And for example, for the database connectivity, you must edit 2 files. One is a subscription and the other one is a task file. And in these 2 files, you define all the actions for the database, also variables which you want to store, and so on. It can be configured via files, but these are different files, I will say. Are there any additional questions? No additional questions? Just as an information, the support for the CNC controllers will be started within February with the first one, which is the 840D from Siemens SIMATIC. And following, we will also include next year the support for Fanuc CNC. Next topic comes from Marco Terminale. He is not asking really a question. He asked more or less organizing a webinar dedicated to use our SDKs. We will put it on our list, and maybe we will have next year some webinars about our SDKs, but please also feel free to take a look to YouTube, our YouTube channel of Softing Industrial. There is already a webinar or 2 webinars regarding the use of our SDKs. One is for .NET and one is also for the C++. You can see it directly on, I will say, our YouTube channel, but we put it also on a list to generate maybe a new one, because this was done, I will say, 5 years ago, roughly.
Maybe as a note on this one, once the webinar closes completely, we have a little survey, as we always do, in terms of a quality check, but also where you're free to raise your ideas, just like the one from Marco right now, which we would take into consideration in planning future webinars. We appreciate that kind of feedback.
If there are no additional questions, I will say many, many thanks to everyone, and I wish everyone a nice day, and I hope we hear us at the next webinar. Bye.
Thank you from Munich. Goodbye.